This morning in Luke chapter 6, I came to that very familiar expression of Jesus, "Judge not, and you will not be judged." For some reason, a lot of worldly people know that verse. And the reason is they don't understand it, so they think it's a good tool to use to tell us not to judge them in their sin. But that's not what Jesus was talking about. When Jesus said, "Judge not, and you will not be judged," he was beginning a series of examples of how we will be measured by the way we measure others. Let's look at that. Judge not, and you will not be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. So what Jesus is saying when he begins, "Judge not, and you will not be judged," he's saying that the measure you use in how you look at other people is the measure that he will use in the way he looks at you. So what he's prohibiting here is a kind of judgment we would never want used against us. And that kind of judging or judgment is when people look at us and they imagine seeing things. You know what that's like when we look at somebody and we add to what we see our judgment of what's going on. Have you ever heard somebody say, "I didn't like the tone you used in a text"? What tone? Well, obviously they judged you that you had a tone because you can't hear a tone in a text. You can see the words and say those words mean something, but as soon as you read a tone into someone's text, you're judging. It's the kind of judging Jesus said not to do. In other words, when you don't actually have any information that the person's doing something, you can't judge them as if they are doing it. I'll give you a really funny example of that. A man I knew in another town where we had a home church, in their town, it was a small town, so the barber he went to was in the same building, a hotel building, as the bar. And the entrance to both was the same entrance into the building. So one day he came to work and a friend was bugging him for being in the bar. And he said he saw him coming out of the bar. It's like, no, you saw him coming out of the building, but he was at the barber. That's the kind of judging Jesus forbids, is when you look at somebody, you see something, and you read into their situation as if they're doing something wrong when you didn't actually see them do anything wrong. And there's lots of scenarios that we could come up with in that regard. When Jesus told his church to judge, he meant when you visibly witness something sinful. Not when you imagine something sinful. I came to hate the word perceived when I was pastoring in the institutional church, because people acted like, if I perceive that you meant this, you have to work it out with me. It's like, how about we do Jesus' words and you just don't judge? Because saying, I perceive that you feel this way about me, or I perceive that you have this attitude, that's judging, and that's the judging that's forbidden. That's different than if you actually witness me yelling at you and saying, I despise you. If you condemn me or judge me for being obnoxious or rude or unkind, that's not bad judging. Addressing objective sin is not bad judging. Jesus is condemning when we are always adding our own interpretations to somebody's actions and then telling other people they did this or they did that when it's not actually verifiable they did that. You just think they did. That's what Jesus is condemning. Who were the people in Jesus' life who were constantly doing this wrong kind of judging. The religious elite. They were constantly looking at Jesus because they wanted to find fault with him. That's the kind of judging Jesus was condemning. When you look at somebody and you're trying to find fault with them, you don't see any, but you want to. You want to find something to gossip about. You want to find something to make them look bad. That's evil. That's horrible. That's so unloving. Again, if you do see a brother sin, you do what Jesus said in Matthew 18. Go and show him his fault just between the two of you. But if you go to your brother and say, brother, I saw you sin, and they say, what exactly did you see? Because this isn't ringing any bells. It's like, well, you came out of that building where the bar is. I was at the barber. See, you have to be careful here that we're not taking Jesus' instructions and applying them the wrong way. The Pharisees, the scribes, these religious elite were constantly trying to find fault. It has come to my attention that the term narcissist, and the church seems to be full of narcissists, are people who can't ever admit to objective sin in their lives, but they're always trying to find fault with others to weaponize it. That's what the Pharisees did. They were always trying to weaponize Jesus' perceived faults. You are doing this wrong. They're always hanging on his words. They brought tests to him to see if they could get him to sin, because they wanted to find fault with him. That's forbidden. Judge not. Don't judge like that. There's no place in God's kingdom for us to judge like that. Jesus, on the other hand, when he called the religious elite blind guides, he gave examples, objective examples of how they were leading people astray. When he called the religious elite hypocrites, that's a judgment. Well, he told the people, look at what they do, look at what they teach, but they don't do. When he called them whitewashed tombs, meaning they made themselves look good on the outside, but they were horrible on the inside, he gave examples of that. My point here is that what Jesus is condemning when he says, judge not, and you will not be judged, is the kind of judgment where we are reading things into people's actions and treating them as if they actually did that. There was a time when this really came to my attention, and it's got to be a couple of decades ago or more. I was listening to a young couple talk about some of their problems together, and the wife began listing some things that her husband was doing wrong that were really bothering her. And I suddenly had this picture in my mind of a piece of lined paper with two columns. And on the one side, the column was subjective, meaning things we perceive, but you can't actually see them. The other side was objective, meaning things that could be verified to be real. They really happened. So as she talked about what her husband was doing, I just realized, well, that was a subjective statement. So I would say, well, where did that come from? Or what's under that? And she'd give me another statement. It's like, well, that's a subjective statement too. And I just kept seeing this right-hand column, right hand to me, left hand to you, this column filling in with one subjective statement after another. And okay, but what's under that? And suddenly she said, well, my dad, and she went into this account of something her dad did to her. And now we could put it in the objective side, and it had nothing to do with her husband. It was such an example of, if I had allowed her to judge her husband based on a subjective feeling, we never would have got to the real issue, which was there's things that are happening in their marriage that this unresolved childhood trauma is triggering. And it's really not about the marriage, it's about old stuff. That really helped me see how serious it is that we admit when we just feel a way about somebody, we probably should go explore the deeper things of why that's there. We have to accept that it is wrong to judge somebody, and the way Jesus worded it there, he's saying don't even entertain thoughts like that. When you look at somebody, if nothing's happening, don't give it any further thought. The phrase out of sight, out of mind came to mind because it made me think, if it's out of sight, like if you're not seeing anything happening, it should be out of your mind. You shouldn't keep thinking, oh, I wonder if this, I wonder if that. That's what Jesus is condemning. Not just that you would come to a conclusion, but that you would waste time trying to figure out if that person has some kind of bad motive about something when you don't even see anything happening. Oh, they haven't called for a while. Okay, so what? You're not seeing anything, so quit thinking about it. Give them a call if you want to. But this horrible way of always thinking, oh, they must be doing this, they must be doing that. Jesus is saying, quit doing that. Quit letting your mind be full of judgmental ways of thinking about others. There's much better things to be thinking, and usually they're right here with the people who are in our lives today. Think about them. What is God's will for them? What is God doing through you for them? If it's not happening, if it's out of sight, let it be out of mind. Think about that hard, because first you have to evaluate, do you go around judging people with that sense of, oh, they must this, they must not that, because you're reading into things? Don't do it. That's wrong. If you see your brother sin, Matthew 18 tells you, go to your brother, go to your sister, show them their fault in private, keep it as small as possible. There's instructions. It's there if it's objective sin. But don't let your mind dwell on things where you're just imagining what ifs and maybes. Jesus said, do not judge. Don't. If you do, the same measure, you want to be judged like that, go for it. Go around judging everybody. You will be given the same. Jesus has something better. Let's pursue that instead.